what's up you guys, this is Rob from The Gay Guy Plays, and today on #confirmed, we're going to be taking our first look at Saryn's Re-Rework. I'm going to call it a Re-Rework because she's already got a rework before, so let's not pretend that this isn't the second time on the block. However, today before prime time, we did get to take a look at some of the changes that are coming up for Saryn as early as next week, and I am so freaking psyched. It looks good, but I want to see how it actually plays on paper. So I figured let's go ahead and quickly touch on each ability and kind of give you a view of how it's going to be working now. So the biggest thing, and before we actually move on in, let's get in front of that real fast, is that Saryn did get some stat increases. She actually went from 175 armor to 225 on non-primes, and then on the prime variant of Saryn, we have a 225, and that is actually jumping up to 300. So that's going to be a nice little boost to her survivability, which, you know, I'm going to take. A buff is a buff is a buff. I will take whatever buffs they want to throw my way. Now, the biggest point of contention with all of this, and it looks really freaking cool, but I actually want to go ahead and practice this out in the field and see if it works the same as it does in the simulacrum, because DE even said it themselves. They're like, the simulacrum isn't actually gameplay. It's, you know, just a place to test things, just to get a visual on how everything works. So starting off with spores, as you can see, one of the big things that you'll see down in the right bottom corner is there is now a little kind of like UI insignia for what Spores does. Spores is a single cast ability, so you can only put out one spore cast at a time. However, it still spreads like the spores originally did. Spores now deal corrosive damage and has a 50% status chance, and will scale with power strength. So you toss on 3 spores onto an enemy. Each of those spores has a 50% chance to proc corrosive, and that is before any power strength mods. If you put more power strength mods on there, that percentage is actually going to increase as well. So this is going to turn spores into, instead of like a health halving tool, it's going to turn more into an armor shredding tool, which to some people can seem really amazing because it's great against enemies that, you know, are heavily armored, but for other enemies that aren't really affected by armor, it kind of does nothing other than more damage. Viral halves everybody's health regardless of what enemy you're taking on, so it's a little bit more universal, and I think that's one of the biggest concerns that's happened with spores. However, like I said, there's only one cast of spores. If you recast spores, it'll cancel all of your spores, and what'll happen is all of your spores will burst, deal double damage, and I think it's based on the number of spores on the enemy and the spores amount of damage it's doing per tick. So you'll see the amount of damage it's doing per tick down in that little corner box. The thing that goes along with that is spores now has an infinite duration. Infinite. So the second you cast spores, the next tick, it's going to do more damage. The next tick after that, it's going to do even more damage. And the damage is going to continue climbing. Now, DE did confess it's not infinite scaling. It actually caps out at 100,000 damage per tick. And you have to keep in mind, this is per tick, per spore. So that's a lot of damage to be doing to enemies, and you'll find that the longer you're able to keep up your spore, the more damage it's going to do. However, of course, it is going to be a little bit more work because you only have that one spore to work with, and you need to make sure to spread it to as many enemies as you possibly can. Now, what you call is the spores can be spread by popping them manually, so if you just want to shoot a spore and it'll pop and it'll spread to surrounding enemies, or you can use Toxic Lash, which we'll get to in a second, but as we know, Toxic Lash will automatically pop a spore on an enemy even if you're not targeting that specific spore, or upon enemy death. So if an enemy dies, their spores will go ahead and spread to other enemies as well. So this is absolutely fantastic to kind of keep these spores up the whole time. Now, the one thing that I do want to pop out, because I know somebody in the comments is going to say it, well, they previewed it on mod and the spores weren't really spreading all that great. If we were paying attention to the build that Rebecca actually took in to mod, number one, she only had one ranged mod on, which means, you know, her spores aren't going to be spreading all over the place. Plus, the enemy density was really, really low in that particular map. The other thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that is her spores were so powerful that they were ending up killing enemies faster than they could spread. And for anyone who's played a lot of Saryn, Saryn on lower end enemies, that's something that's common and that tends to happen. If you're not a normal Saryn player, then you wouldn't be aware of that issue. But the thing about Saryn spores is Saryn is really, really made for higher end play, and that's really where you see these big damage bursts come out of her because of the fact that her spores are really spread everywhere. So I don't want to hear any of that in the comment section, because I definitely feel that that is a big sign of inexperience with Saryn. So if you don't know about Saryn, don't start talking about Saryn. All right. So the one thing that I do need to point out, because we've heard all of the positives, you know, its duration is infinite, so we don't have to worry about duration mods for this specific ability. At the same time, the damage escalates, which is absolutely fucking amazing. They've swapped it over to corrosive, which is great for armor stripping, but not so good for health halving. You know, there's a little bit of a trade-off there, and you can pop them early to, you know, deal a big burst of damage. That's the positives. A couple of the things that I did want to point out is the fact that they no longer carry toxin procs. So it's kind of lost out on that synergy there. However, Toxic Lash has gotten a very big, I guess I would say, a big buff to it. So that's the only thing you need to be aware of with spores at the moment. And there's also another synergy, but we'll get into that later. So let's go ahead and move into Molt. Molt is a very simple upgrade. It's going to act very similarly to Rhino's Iron Skin. When you cast it, the first initial few seconds, it's actually going to absorb a lot of the damage, or absorb all of the damage that's done to it, and that's going to convert it into HP. So that'll help it scale a little bit better and help it synergize with regenerating Molt a little bit better as well. Now it's got more HP to work with, and you'll have more time on your regenerating Molt to get your health back. Fantastic. And also, after you cast Molt, you'll actually be granted a little bit of a speed boost, because, you know, usually when you cast Molt, you gotta go. So that is absolutely fantastic. However, here's the other caveat that comes along with spores. You can no longer cast spores on Molt. And this kills the synergy where people literally were just spamming spores on Molt and popping them, spamming spores on Molt and popping them. It's one of those things that I've pointed out in the past. It's high efficacy, low effort. And it's one of the things that DE has always fought against. So for anybody who's surprised, for anybody who's sad, I'm going to say this again. If you're sad that this synergy is gone, it sounds like you weren't the greatest Saryn player out there. I'm putting out jabs. It's the reality of it. But some people got lazy. Some people wanted to just do the lowest effort that they possibly could. Cast and pop and cast and pop. Now the thing is, have I done it before? Yes. I'm guilty of doing it before, but admittedly, it's a boring as fuck style of gameplay. Now you gotta get up and go pop your spores, baby. Okay? So, I mean, listen. You logged in to play a game. You didn't log in to go into autopilot. Alright? So, let's go ahead and move into Toxic Lash. This one, I think a lot of people are going to be very excited about, is that it now applies to all weapons and will grant double damage to melee weapons. Now, for all of y'all who never used Toxic Lash before, because we know some people didn't, because they were watching people on the internet that just avoided that ability completely because they didn't know how to play Saryn. But I digress. Toxic Lash will actually apply a toxin status proc to any enemies that hits. It used to be melee only, now it's going to be on all weapons, so ranged and melee. Melee gets the double bonus, but the duration was also increased, which is nice, which is definitely nice, and it will still spread spores, but to my dismay and to the people who have been using Toxic Lash, it will no longer grant you energy back on any of the spore popping that comes along with it. So for those of you guys out there who didn't know, apparently a lot of people didn't know, that's actually one of the best synergies that was out there to keep Saryn's energy up. it was absolutely great, and she was actually able to do some really cool channeling builds along with it, but unfortunately that's dead. And the reason that's dead is because you're no longer needing to recast spores. You have a longer duration on Toxic Lash, and Molt is going to have a little bit more survivability. So that's kind of their explanation for it. For me, I'm a little sad because I really liked it, but you know what? You can't win them all, right? So let's go ahead and move on to the last little bit, which is Miasma. It now deals viral damage and has a 100% chance to proc the viral status. So as you can see here, Spores and Miasma have switched damage types. So Spores is out there working in the field, stripping armor for you, doing all of that. And then Miasma, you can actually go ahead and use to half health, kind of like you did before with Spores instead. So you still have that option. Of course, the range is much lower on Miasma. It doesn't spread, but hopefully, because of the fact that you've stripped the armor off of the enemies, that Miasma is going to be able to deal bonus damage off of that, and you'll also get the viral proc on top of it to half the enemy's health. The damage has actually been increased. I believe it's from 350 to 500. The duration is increased from 3 seconds to 5 seconds. And it deals double damage to enemies affected by spores. So all of these still kind of synergize, not as much with Toxic Lash, but you know, you use Toxic Lash to spread your spores, yada yada yada, which ends up being able to have Miasma deal double damage. But one thing I do want to point out, it no longer destroys molts, and it does not get bonuses for enemies with toxin damage. So it's kind of lost that synergy right there, and because of the fact that, you know, it doesn't need the toxin procs, it doesn't need to destroy your molt, which is great for you because you get to keep that defensive bit up. Now, when we see this one seems fine. The only concern that I have for it, and it's a question that I posed, and hopefully I've scooted along to DE, and I'm like, alright, so Miasma's damage is increased, the duration is decreased. Are we saying that we're gonna see Miasma spam builds back? Is that how it's gonna be, or is it not gonna be powerful enough to do that? Like, that's my big question, because if we're giving up 1 spam and getting 4 spam, that's not necessarily fantastic. I'm not down for that. I'm like, literally, you've traded one for the other, and that does not sound like something that you're wanting to do, really. Like, you didn't want it to do it to begin with. That's why you went through the first Saryn rework, so why are you gonna do this with this rework? The other thing that I'm concerned about is spores, to see how how it all works out. I mean, it does seem like they've tuned spores to work really, really well with corrosive, but how is that going to affect gameplay? I'm excited to see it in action. I'm all down for changes and experimentation and all of that kind of stuff. Of course, I'm always crossing my fingers that it goes well, because you know, I think that DE's got their QA testers, and they've got some great ideas, but I just want to make sure that when we get our hands on it, it translates. So what I'm also going to do is I'm going to leave the, what do you call this? I'm going to leave the link to the dev workshop down below. You guys can go ahead and leave your feedback, along with, you know, any of the cool footage that you saw. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. The biggest changes to me were really spores and Miasma. I've been using Toxic Lash for ages, so that's not really anything new to me, and Molt just sounds like it's been improved. Spores, in the simulacrum, which DE said it themselves is not actual gameplay, the numbers looked insane. And that was on an unmodded Saryn against level 1000s, right? So what more if we get our builds in that we can tweak and really specialize to do what we want them to do? Like, I think that's going to be pretty crazy, and it can get insane. However, we just gotta see how it all pans out when we get it in game. And apparently we're getting it as early as next week. So by taking a look at all of this stuff, you know, all of the what do you call it, the scenery? What am I calling this? All of the background footage from the stream today, let's just call it that. Let me know how you feel in the comments below. Again, if you're gonna leave a paragraph, please go ahead and leave that in the forums instead. Mainly because I want you guys to be able to give your great ideas there and not really waste them here, because I'm not going to be able to do anything about them if I'm going to be right with you. But that about does it for me for now. And as always, love somebody, hurt nobody, and touch yo spores. Oh, that's not good. Y'all know I don't like all that weird. Oh, I've grossed myself out. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Bye! Ugh.